Hi everybody, I am Regina Mahoney, City Manager for the City of Essex Junction. This is the next episode of our Junction City News. I am actually here by myself tonight, so it might be a little boring in relation to other episodes, but lots to talk about in terms of our proposed FY27 budget and the ballot items that folks will see this annual meeting. So the general fund budget, we are looking at about a $500,000 increase over FY26. That's about a 4% change. What that means for an average household is about $118 over FY26. And as we've been doing since the start of the budget process this year, we're also presenting some very preliminary utility rates so that folks can have a sense of what the change is for FY27, both from property taxes as well as utility rates. So the amount that you see on your water bills. So all collective right now, it's looking to be about $217 increase over FY26. Like I said, those utility rate fees are quite preliminary. The City Council approves those budgets and the rates on their own over the next couple of months. Those are not budgets that go to the voters. So those other numbers might change, but the general fund is pretty on point at this point. So just a little bit of more detail about how we built the FY27 budget. The council gave us direction to get as close to 3% as possible. We ended up at about a 4% increase. And essentially, one benefit is health insurance, which I will talk about a little bit further. So the budget includes a 4.25% salary and wage merit increase for staff. There are increases in technology subscription costs, repair and maintenance for vehicles, equipment, and buildings as all of our infrastructure is aging. And overall, we are seeing some health insurance increases. But it's important to note that the health insurance rates overall went up less than we anticipated. So we were able to right size that for the first half of FY27 in the 2026 calendar year, and then are anticipating a more modest increase for calendar year 2027. So there's two different health insurance rates within a fiscal year. But as folks change plans, family plans, those overall costs to the city can go up as well. In addition, we've got some increased cleaning costs to Lincoln, especially after the renovation, because we've got some more contract services for different components that were added to that building, like heat pumps and the elevator. So other two pieces to point out is that the assessor's budget went from 1.7 full FTEs to 2 FTEs. And currently the city and the town have an agreement to share the assessing services through the end of FY26 for the reappraisal. Then we entered into another contract for another 3-year term after that. Also for the police budget, the police department went through a negotiation this past year with a new contract, and so you see some of those costs showing up in this FY27 budget. This slide just gives a little bit more information about that health insurance cost. So we really only saw a 2% increase for calendar year 2026, which is amazing. We've seen closer to almost 18% over the last couple of years, so really appreciate that. And then we're anticipating about 12% increase in 2027, which is a total estimate at this point, but hopefully that works out okay. There are no new positions contemplated in this budget, except for that slight increase from a 1.7 full-time employee to 2 full-time employees in the assessing side of things. And overall, in the general fund budget, about 34% of the budget is made up in salary and benefit costs. So we have continued to analyze some of our service contracts and looking to get high quality service in the best cost effective way we can. So we have just switched over to a citywide cleaning contract, which has been helpful. We've looked at a few other things like contracting out sidewalk plowing, contracting out street painting, and so far some of those things have not proven to be cost effective by going that route, but we continue to look at all those services and try to figure out how to get the best service at the best cost for the city. We anticipate in this coming year that we will likely put out an RFP for IT service, managed service provider as well. And as we have been doing the last couple of years, we continue to look at the program fund at EJRP and see if there are any expenses that make sense to move out of the general fund and into specific program areas at EJRP. Essentially what that does is the folks who use those services specifically end up paying for those costs as opposed to the full city. So as an example, in FY27, we have moved over some of the cleaning of Park Street School, where the preschool is, over to the program fund and out of the general fund. The other thing that we looked at quite a bit this year in putting the FY27 budget together is the transfers. So we have in the general fund about 9% of it, 8 or 9% of the general fund is really moving money over to other things. And the main reason why we do that is to save for capital projects. So within the general fund, we move some of that money over into paying for capital projects that require savings over time and over time until we've saved up enough money in order to be able to pay for those expensive projects. So one change that we made is for the general fund capital transfer. We have increased that every year. It's been the practice in the city, village, and now city to increase that transfer every year. And now with the local option tax, when we looked at that this year, we felt like we could keep that capital transfer level based on the increased revenue that we're seeing from the local option tax. So that's helpful. We kept the rolling stock transfer at 7%. Rolling stock is essentially anything that we have that has wheels on it, literally. So trucks and equipment that roll around. And then we kept the retirement fund transfer. That just helps us save for folks who retire, and there's a lot of benefit payout that they get, and so we can be prepared and save for that. Also, since we have become a city, we have been paying close attention to the unassigned fund balance. So in very simple terms, the unassigned fund balance is a rainy day safety net. The city has a policy that we would obtain a 15% unassigned fund balance from one year to the next. First couple of years of being a city, we were only at 7% of an unassigned fund balance at the end of every fiscal year. That felt a little too small. And so in this current budget, the FY26 budget, we transferred an additional $100,000 into that fund. Thankfully, at the end of FY25, we were closer to a 12% unassigned fund balance. And so that is great news. We're feeling in a bit of a safer position. And so we didn't do an additional transfer into that this year, or not proposed to do an additional transfer in FY27. So the budget, is broken down into a number of different cost centers. Essentially, those translate to our departments for the most part. What you can see here is the biggest piece of the pie. 32% of our expenses are for public safety, so police, fire, and rescue. Next up is general government. So this is a kind of a number of different departments in there: administration, legislative, clerk, finance, IT, and assessing. Then public works is 13%. You see there that 9% transfers and miscellaneous expenses that I was talking about before. Then you see recreation at 9% and the library at 8%, and then they go down from there. This is what we are anticipating the revenue side to look like. So we are undergoing a reappraisal right now. What that means is we won't, at the end of the day, when the reappraisal is done, the city will not receive any additional tax revenue than we expect to get right now. It's a cost neutral process, the reappraisal. But what might happen is the value of the types of property in the city may shift. So right now we expect to see about 76% of our property taxes come from residential properties, 10% from businesses, and then specifically we have Global Foundries here listed separately because they make up 6% of the revenues. Those percentages may shift either more to residential or away from residential. So what folks pay may be different, but collectively at the end of the day, the city won't see any increased revenue from that. With the general fund budget, the council is also looking at the capital fund and what projects. This is a list of projects that we anticipate happening in FY27. That is not a guarantee. It all depends on what the bids come back like and if we have enough money to do them as we're planning to. And just a number of different things can kind of shift this list. But this is what the list looks like today. And there's actually a change to this on Monday night that's not reflected here in these slides. The Veterans Memorial Park restoration may get pushed and a different project readjusted here. Other exciting thing about the FY27 budget is it is the first time that we have kind of completed the first full year cycle of our strategic planning process. So last spring, the City Council met and had a retreat where they prioritized work for the coming year. That provided direction to staff to pull together the budget for FY27, and now we are here presenting that budget. This spring, we will kick off that process again, and it's just it's a helpful way to keep focused on the priorities and how to help the council direct us on what we need to be focused on. So, in addition to the budget, Essex Junction voters have a number of articles that are likely coming their way. I say proposed for all of these because the Essex Junction annual meeting is not until April 14th. And moving backwards from that, the council doesn't approve the warning for until March 11th. So things might change. We don't anticipate things changing, but they could in between now and then. So these next couple of questions are all from the Essex Junction Governance Committee, a committee that was pulled together over this past year to look at the governance structure in Essex Junction and whether they proposed any changes to it. Essentially, when the village became a city, the governance structure stayed the same in the sense of there were 5 trustees elected at large throughout the village. There are 5 city council members elected at large in the city. There is a president, so the 5 members of the council organize themselves and choose the president as opposed to an elected mayor. So the governance committee looked at a number of different things in that realm, and this was a requirement when the charter was passed back in 2022, that within 3 years of the village becoming a city, this governance committee had to do this work. So we're at the end of that process, and the result of it is a number of questions really around city council stipends. So this first one is asking the voters if they approve increasing the city council stipends from $2,500, which they are today, to $3,600. The second question is, should the president of the council make 25% more than the compensation of the rest of the council members? The governance committee recommended this because it is an additional workload for the president position. The third question is, should the charter be changed so that the stipends for the council is adjusted based on the CPI, Consumer Price Index, each year, as opposed to the city council themselves making this change through their budget process each year. Question number 5 is also from the governance committee. This is not about city council stipends. This is more about, just like how the original city charter required that a governance committee come together and look at the governance structure in the first 3 years of the city becoming a city. The governance committee liked this idea that I believe is in Brattleboro. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's Brattleboro, who has a similar section in their charter that requires the governance committee to be pulled together, and look at the charter at least every 12 years. That does not limit the city from taking a look at some other sections along the way if they want to amend something, but it's kind of a line in the sand of a good amount of time to kind of really think more deeply about the governance structure. Moving on, this is a very different question. This is really about on-time payments for tax payments. So in the city charter, taxes are due in 2 installments in the city, and the charter itself is silent specifically on the time and method of payment. So without that distinction being clear in the city charter, the city reverts to the state statute, and state statute says that postmarks are considered an on-time form of payment. So essentially, so long as your payment goes to the post office, gets a postmark before the due date, and arrives to the city offices later than that due date, it would still be considered on time. So the question in front of the voters is whether to continue that practice or essentially disallow postmarks as an on-time form of payment. The question is on the ballot largely because postmarks don't happen all the time in the post office anymore, and it can be a little tricky to use that as a on-time payment method. So that's that question. Next question is in consideration of a general obligation bond for the Public Works facility. So the Public Works facility is really at the end of its life, and there are a number of challenges with the current facility. It is not large enough to keep all of our equipment inside, and this is very expensive equipment. And while that equipment stays outside, those all come to the end of their lives much quicker than if we could keep this equipment inside. It's also woefully inadequate in terms of staff facilities, and especially for staff who are sometimes working overnight to stay on top of snowstorms. There's a really terrible bathroom in there. It's just really not a great facility. So this proposal is on the ballot to take out a bond for that project. Article 8. So back in 2023, voters in Essex Junction approved a loan for the initial phase of this lead water service line work. So the federal drinking water rules require that water departments essentially review their water service lines in their system to make sure there is no lead in those service lines, both on the private side of the line and the public side of the line. We completed that first level of work, and now the rules require that we take a deeper level of review and investigation to ensure that the non-lead service lines are indeed non-lead, and to confirm the material identification. So we'll have to do some actual digging and some further investigation in the system. So this is for another loan to do that work. It's just under $900,000. The benefit of this stage of the project is that the City of Essex Junction will qualify for some loan forgiveness. And we will only need to take out as much of what the project actually costs. So that $900,000 is probably not exactly what we would need, and we would pay back closer to $400,000 of it. Then Article 9, I believe this is the last one. This question is about the creation of a social services funding program, and specifically to approve a 1-cent tax to support that program. Essentially, when the village was a part of the town, collectively the village taxpayers contributed to a similar social service funding model when we were with the town. Since separation, the town has continued that granting program, but the city has not. So this question is to the voters to basically set up this similar program on the city side. Essentially, it would be used to fund social service agencies that address health, housing, and food security issues for residents of Essex Junction. So that is that. That's all the questions. Coming up next in our process on February 25th, the council will have another meeting where they talk about mostly the bond vote. They need to approve a necessity resolution for that. So that will be on the agenda. And we start a series of public hearings on the charter amendments. Then at the March 11th meeting, everything needs to be finalized because that's when the warning for the annual meeting is complete so that the ballots can be printed. On March 23rd, we will have the informational hearing on all of these ballot items. And then voting day, the annual meeting, is on April 14th, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the Champlain Valley Fair. And that is it. So thank you so much for joining for this edition of Junction City News. The council is hosting many engagement sessions. You can see that information on our website. Come out and meet some counselors and ask any questions that you've got on the ballot items. The concept is really to get out and talk with folks about it now before everything is finalized, and the ballots are printed. So that's it, and thank you so much.